Greetings, folks. Greetings, folks. Now I've got the mic on. Yeah, so this is new software. So I used, hang on a moment, let's get fancy. Get that down there. So on the 27th of July, 2019, I used StreamYard in a video with Ruth to test it. Right. And new software. So, yeah. So, this is about, again, in the title, how are you empirical, how are you subjective? So this one will be a little bit tricky in that, because as you know, my position is that functions are to be described, not defined, because those are cognitive processes, and it's about describing those processes. And as such, because we're doing today, we're going through SFJ versus SFP. There's going to be a lot of comparison of feeling with what I call sensory instincting, and what Van der Hoek called instinct, and what Jung called sensation, and what MBTI calls sensing. Well, what Van der Hoek noticed and what Kersey noticed is that sensing is not just sensor. We've got here artisans from Kersey. Seek stimulation, and that's sensory stimulation, and sort of sensation-seeking behavior. And then Dario, who was mentored by Linda Behrens from 1994 until recently, until they eventually became equals, that Dario has taken on board the Kersey temperaments, because Kersey taught Linda Behrens and Linda Behrens taught Dario. And so Dario's definition of SE is like a distillation of the artisan temperament. And so what we have here is we have a lot of stuff which is emotional. And so emotions are different from feelings. Feelings are more cerebral, emotions are more limbic. So, for example, exciting physical impulses. There's a thrill. Enjoy the thrill of action. And this is an SE. The thrill of action. So the thrill of it. And then we have the sort of the emotionings, as I call those, for the guardian temperament, is you're going towards trust, safety, what one is comfortable with, that sort of these what is comfortable, familiar, reliable, and there's sort of a feeling they're going towards safety. Whereas for the artisan, they're going towards excitement, and that is bound up with the sensation. So that's why for Jung, the word sensation is better than sensing. So this is what Van der Hoek wrote about instinct. So, and I sort of break it down into these parts of instinct. I call it sensory instincting. So, one, to verbify it with the ing, really hammer home to people that this is a verb, it's not a thing. So, you got the sensation with the emotion and the action and some sensory motor know-how. And this is more explicit with the artisan. Think of the artisan fighter pilot or boxer. The sensation and the emotion and the action is all bound up. And then there is the acting on instinct, So let's go through some of this. Because I had begun to regard emotion as an expression of instinct, I was no longer able to accept Jung's formulation of the function of perception. Also because perception is, and Van der Hoek was right, he defined it as a narrow, circumscribed process related to thought. And that's how it's defined in cognitive psychology, because it's object recognition, letter recognition, recognition of sounds that are actually words. You're recognizing objects in perception. There was once Jonathan Ross used to do a competition where on the radio where it would be, he would play a sound and people would call in and try to guess what the sound was, to recognize the sound. And in a video, I took a piece from an old mechanical typewriter and I said, "What is this?" So you've got the raw sensory experience, but when you make sense of it, recognize it, that is perception. Yeah. Perception of motion, perception of depth. It's the understanding of the raw sensory experience. So looking at and so this is the stuff that's in red will sound like Kersey's artisans. So emotional reactions are immediately bound up with the sensations. So-called feeling tone, together with reactions of liking and disliking, thus form with sensation a psychological entity. And also he mentions elsewhere that it's better to frame feeling as sentiment and emotion as different. Like the kind of emotions that a dog feels when you can see there's anger, there's happiness, there's fear. These are limbic. It's a different part of the brain. There's disgust as well. And so this is, again, talking about Jung's sensation types. So initially, Van der Hoek was a bit of a fanboy of Jung, and he was trained by Jung. And in about a year after Psychological Types came out, he was like pretty much saying, "Yeah, I agree with this." And that's 1921. This comes out in the original German. It comes out in 1937, and he is a psychiatrist. So we know he knew about it in about 1921, 1922, and is a working psychiatrist and lecturing on psychiatry. And so 16 years later, INTP as well, he described himself as an introverted thinking type with subsidiary intuition and with a strong polarity, which means his instinct and his feeling are strong. Well, I mean, as a psychiatrist, he'd draw more on his feeling function. Yeah. So in describing the sensation types, in studying their mode of adaptation, I saw, in fact, more and more clearly that they were not guided exclusively by their sensations, but by their sensations coupled with their emotional reactions thereto, and further by their instinctual needs. So if you think of the fighter, think of a boxer. There's anger in there. Sometimes there's cautiousness. If there's a boxer, like if a famous boxer for having a real fighting spirit, and he had that before he was boxing because he was in the army. Nigel Benn, the Dark Destroyer, that's what it was framed as. He was in a brutal fight with Gerald McClellan, and Gerald McClellan ended up in a wheelchair, and Nigel Benn was in a state of being really like triumphant and really in an aggressive mode, even towards the end of the fight where McClellan was damaged. And it's interesting to see in interviews where you sort of talk to Nigel Benn about the state that he was in at the time, because he was in a real warrior mode. So like I said, you've got adrenaline, you've got the emotion, you've got that emotional response going on there at the same time. This is not just passive sensor. So, and then also, this is ridiculous that sometimes I get a bit OCD, is trying to fit that line in. I rewrote that line so many times in order to fit it on the line. It's a bit ridiculous, really. Instinctual needs as well. And the instinctual needs of artisans are very different from the instinctual needs of guardians. However, you can see some SE usage in ESTJs and the SFJs, especially when it's in service of a function. So, for example, if an ESFJ is protecting his or her family, or protecting children in general, or its reputation, then you can see the anger come forth, and they can do the SE, that part of it, but it's not the improvisational part of SE. An ESTJ can enforce the rules and be a sort of the drill sergeant supervisor. So different parts of SE are used. And then here, the way Van der Hoek would frame a function as a form of adaptation, interesting way to think about it. And again, as a verb, adaptation is here governed by emphases in regard to emotion and attention in the field of sensations, and that action is also directed by details of a concrete time, a concrete kind. So we could also say something like this in thinking about the overlap between instincting and intuiting. Instincting is related to the concrete, intuiting is related to the abstract. And this is why intuitive people tend to be abstract in speech, and instinctive people tend to be concrete in speech. Right, okay. That's sort of how I've sort of put it. And then a bit more here. In intuitive experience, there is spontaneous insight into the relation. This is very like any bias in the definition of, because that's like any in it, seeing the connections, as a result of which they assume an added significance. That's more describing any, because this is all external. Group of facts, well, facts are external. Well, any kind of psychological facts, and like that gets a bit more towards NI, especially for sort of self-realization. There is something quite different from the practical instinctive knowledge which results from emphasis and sensation. Right. Right, so here we go. We now see the sphere of conscious instinctual experience as a mode of conscious orientation. Yeah, so it would call these functions modes of conscious orientation. And a way to think about this is Chris Howard, an NLP guru. There's a quote from him that really sort of grabbed my attention, and that was, your focus determines your reality. So think of that as the lead function and the top two. So the focus, say at a dinner table, the focus of the ESFJ versus the focus of the INTP versus the focus of an idealist. And now that becomes a sort of psychological reality for the person. So we could do these 4 types. Well, actually, let's just do the 2. The focus of attention of the SFJ at the dinner table is going to be on FE and SI. Values. The SFJ is going to be, even without consciously focus on it, they're going to take in the feeling state of other people. If someone is looking down, the ESFJ will take that in and it will affect, they will interject that feeling state and they will feel it as well. And so there's that part of FE with ESFJ. Then there's also the sort of the moral part of ESO, focus on how are people doing, or being responsible. That sort of depends on, again, more towards assertive FE. Are people showing people, or doing what the guardian temperament stuff coming in? Are people doing what they should be doing? And it also that very much depend on culture as to what people should be doing. As one small thing, and ISFJ would like take in people's needs and how people are sort of like caring for someone's physical needs. That the focus of attention there. SFP, their focus of attention is going to be on, there's an aspect of fun and improvisation and a tendency towards ESFP to want to entertain people. ESFJ wants to do that a little bit as well because it loves to get a positive reaction from people, but it's more so in ESFP, where you can sort of the raconteur. And ISFP is going to be more focused on the sort of the feeling states of people, and a sort of a deeper level, or it could be more concerned with itself. Maybe it depends on the people there. Like, is there that much of a sense of connection? I mean, if it's an Enneagram 4 fixated ISFP, it is going to be a bit more egocentric. Right. An Enneagram 9 ISFP will be more focused on other people, especially if those other people are sort of important relationships. So, yeah. So the focus of attention there is different. SFJ is going towards shoulds. What will the neighbours think? What people should be doing. Very much affected by the emotions of other people. The SFP is very much aware of those on a sort of a sensory level and affected by it a bit because they're all SFs, SFJs and SFPs. But with the SFP, there's a focus on freedom, but there can be those FI moments where it sort of trips a nerve, where that it's almost like SFPs are, yes, they're focused on SE stuff and enjoyment, but if someone says something and it can like trip a virus, like, oh, that's not cool, and it's like, oh, I had an FI moment there, where, yeah, right then, so yeah, so right, so we now see the sphere of conscious and mode of conscious orientation covering various items, which nevertheless appear to us coupled with our emotional and behavioural reactions thereto as part of a single experience, bringing with it a practical form of knowledge, inseparable from the sensations involved. So one way you could do this is you could sort of role play it as a type and what the type is sort of focusing on. Yeah, inseparable from the sensations involved. And then we've got here, emotional reactions to sensations are frequently accompanied by an impulse to act, especially with artisans. Impulse to act, trusting impulse from that one with Kersey over here. Trusting impulse, trusting authority. At least that's the initial instinct. I mean, it's like, it doesn't mean all authorities, because they might hear from other authorities, so like say the parents, or they may have learned themselves not to trust the government. So, frequently accompanied by an impulse to act. In our conscious mind, this may assume various forms, e.g., so the orange is SE, e.g., that of a vague inclination to do something, or of a strong impulsive drive towards certain acts. That's your artisans. Jeff once said he woke up in the middle of the night and thought, I have to go out and burn something. Right. Or there may arise a certain mode of behavior determined more or less by habits. It's been more of an instinct to habit with the guardians. But again, that's like, the habit is the behavior, the motivation is safety, consistency, security, comfort, the mindset of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. It's small c conservative. And then read the know-how. It is impossible to say that this form of knowing is chaotic. It is controlled by fixed associations of sensation and action. The original instinctual interest lending to things their primary meaning, Drever, has led to further experiences, as a result of which fresh emphases in the field of sensation have provided a secondary meaning, and these points attracting special attention are linked up by being associated together in practice. So, for example, I remember a PE teacher, and he also taught maths, telling me about explaining that for certain children, it would be, you just had to do it and they could watch it and copy it. Whereas other ones, you had to go through all of the technique of what, but they could just see it and then copy it. So maybe that's getting more towards this idea of fixed associations in the field of sensation. So this is just getting onto the fact that this is why I'm calling it sensory instincting. It's got emotion involved, and I'll try to do the nuances of the differences when I go through these types. So you've got ESFJ here. So this question, how is ESFJ empirical? Well, it's empirical with the FE. It's picking up the affect display. So the facial expressions, the body language, the tone of voice that people are giving off. It's also aware of mores, social conventions. What will the neighbours think? Manners, aspects like that. That is empirical. That is empirical in that someone could study a. Let me just adjust that. Someone could study a. What we need is looking room on this, because you know where my eyes are, and you've got this gap at the side. Looking room where you frequently want someone a bit over at the side, and you want a bit of a gap on that side, and then that's called looking room. There you go, the looking room there. So so that's empirical in that you can look at a culture and you can ask people, yeah, that's the done thing in that society. That is the values of that setting. That's empirical. And I frequently mention Paul Ekman's study in a tribe that was cut off from other societies. They had the same expressions as everybody else, same facial expressions. Now you have culturally specific gestures that are different. So, for example, that gesture, the sort of okay gesture, is very rude in Brazil, but not in the rest of South America. So that's a gesture, not a. But the facial expressions are pretty much universal. It's the same expression for disgust, same expression for surprise, same expression for fear. that's empirical. And he actually studied it and had the facial action coding system. And then we have subjective. So the particular history that, so SI is not memory, but SI leads to a drawing on memory. Why? Because it wants to go with the ultimate value of SI is low risk safety. So in order to be safe, you go towards what has worked. What has worked is in the past. So you're going to draw on memory to go towards what has worked, a conservative approach. So just as TI draws on reason, but reason is not TI, SI draws on memory. Whereas artisans are in the moment, and so they are on sensory acuity in the moment. So, for example, SE is not sensory acuity, but draws on sensory acuity. You could have an intuitive that has very good sensory acuity, but actually doesn't use it because it's the head is more in the clouds. So now I'll get into the functions of that. So I mentioned FE, and I'll just sort of show this on screen for how is FE empirical. And I frequently mention that there is an asinine dichotomy in socionics, original socionics, information socionics, that prevents socionics from having a proper understanding of Verton. It doesn't understand extroversion and introversion because, from a socionics point of view, sensing and thinking are external, and feeling and intuiting are internal. So they don't see that something which is extroverted is empirical and is external, and something which is introverted is subjective and internal. So because they have that asinine dichotomy, they can't understand, for example, that you can have a subjective side to sensing. Because sensing is external, therefore it cannot have a subjective side. Okay, what about beauty is in the eye of the beholder? What about the fact that people can have vastly different taste? And it's like they are seeing different things. There's a subjective side. Or what about with body dysmorphia and a thin person looks in the mirror and sees a fat person? What about when you have, when Pat Patterson talks about sensory description in songs and poetry, that can be very personal for the individual because of what it evokes. So these are these subjective interpretations from the sensory experience, the subjective factor. Someone hears a piece of music that, say, they heard it and they heard it when they first met somebody, or there's sort of these subjective memories bound up with the sensation. So there is that subjective side to sensor. And also, I mentioned it a lot in the video where I talked about thinking, so I'm not going to talk about, I'm talking about sensing and feeling here. So the empirical part of sensing is, and you notice this in the difference between artisans and guardians in the way that they look at an experience, is that the artisans will go towards more of the objective, objective's got three meanings, so I'm going towards empirical, that artisans they're focused on the here and the now and the empirical qualities, to such an extent that Kersey said that the speech of artisans is qualitative and it will go towards the sensory qualities. And the speech of guardians, he also put in pictorial and consonant, in that artisan speech frequently sounds good. That's why artisans like word plays and rap. We also have guardian speech is orthodox, quantitative, so it goes towards logistics, and especially quantitative will be the STJs. And then we've got associative. As you've got the associative, is you've got the SI with the NE. And it's like, oh, a smell. Oh, got red boots. I remember I had red boots like that. Oh, my sister had red boots like that. And it's like the sister may have died, and it's like they might get a subjective reaction to seeing those red boots. So, and it's the sensory. I think I've digressed a bit here. But yeah, so you've got with the Guardians, it's that subjective response to the sensory where it draws on particular memories and associations because you've got the SI working with the NE. And then Kersey would talk about Guardians having that associative speech of the topic moving by association. As you can see how that's like NPs, but with NPs, go from topic to topic. It's more like going from one abstraction to another, the way I do. But with Guardians, they'll bring up something and it will remind them of something else. It's concrete. So it's like, oh, we had this red. Oh, I had a red jumper, and it's like this, and then she's. So it's concrete examples of connections, and this is similar to this. This is associated with this. So what we could say is that's Guardian NE. That's SI working with NE, seeing these associations, seeing these connections, but it's on a concrete plane. So it's subjective and associative, and the associations will be subjective as well, because the associations will be specific to the individual. It's like, oh, that reminds me of that. The other person is, that doesn't remind me of that. I didn't know about that, but it does remind me of this other thing. Whereas the artisans are focused on what is the actual sensory qualities, the empirical sensory data there, not the connections, not the associations there. So, in that is how Guardians and SFJs for this are more going towards the subjective, what it connects and what it evokes for them, and associated with the memories. So, but getting back to how is FE empirical? I have it there. You can see what you can see. Empirical. So, yes, there is a percept. There is a percept. And you can even say that with manners. There's a percept in terms of what the FJ has been taught, the morality of it, especially SFJs. There's a bit more ethics comes in with NFJs because idealists, but there is that FE of, and it's like the memory aspect there as well of this is not the done thing. This is not. It's still going off percepts. It's going off perceptions. A percept as in an object of perception in the mind of what is the moral thing to do, how has the person been brought up, what are the values that have been taught, and all of that is coming in, and that is empirical because that is what that particular person was taught. It's not necessarily 100% true because you can look at one culture, you can look at an SFJ in one culture and then compare it to a very different culture. But for that SFJ, it is empirical. Those are the values that SFJ learned from the family, the church, or whatever religion that person has been brought up with. Those are the values. And to that person, those values, that morality is empirical in that it's what is expected. It's what people talk around that person. It's not imagined. It's not come from within. It's empirically there. Someone can come in and visit that culture, and it's like, especially ENFPs, they love to travel and experience different cultures. And it's like, oh, these are the values in this culture. And it's like, those values are empirically there. You can study it in the literature, ask people to do research, statistical. It's like, those are there. So that bit is empirical. The percepts are empirical. And so, And again, this sort of bit I wrote about percepts, how it's empirical. Again, the affect display, the facial expressions and tone of voice, it's there. Again, character in action. Like, most people are going to do the boo hiss or the equivalent of. They're not going to be happy with that as a reaction. So you could say that that's sort of empirical from a human point of view. And then the group morality. Again, most of this is coming from memories of how someone was socialized and taught right from wrong, and from the parents and that, and from the society. And even some societies that may have been propagandized. If you think of, say, North Korea. And then conceptually there, conceptually using the premise of empirical subjective to divide the four superfunctions into the 8 Jungian cognitive functions. Again here, if 5 FE DOMs were experiencing the same affect display, the response is predicted to be more similar between members of that FE DOM group than between members of an FI DOM group who are more focused on the subjective relatability. Now that's if you were to ask those people. So again, SFJs versus SFPs. If you'd asked them about the feeling aspect, there would be more similarity. If you asked them about the sensory aspect, there would be more variation, because it would go towards the subjective associations. Oh, this reminded me of that. Again, how are you empirical? How are you subjective? And then, because I once put for FE group morality, and then Jonathan said awareness of group morality. I thought, yes, Jonathan, you are right again. Again, and then for when it's in that first position, awareness of group morality and the ability to change the feeling states of others via expressivity of one's own feelings. Right. So you can see there, that is how it's empirical. That's how it's external. And then we've got some of the values here. And again, here we've got FE with SI. Again, so it's you're providing for people. And again, it's on a concrete level, practical, supplying and protecting, informing half occurs as logistical, safekeeping intellect. And then I might cover those again, but now values. The FE values. Concern for others, harmony, personal warmth, good atmosphere, a good time had by all, esprit de corps, aka morale, group focus, mores, reputation, acceptance, and approval. And then I've gone through these before. Right, and again, how is one subjective? How is someone empirical? So you know these are the subfunctions. I'm going to change that. There you go, maybe see it better. Again, it can be asserted. So as Megan Laverta once said, FE doesn't mean martyr. You can be an assertive kind of FE. So again, Amos Burton, I think ESFJ. The way I see it, there are 3 kinds of people in this world. Bad ones, those you protect, and those you follow. So you can see there's that EJ part of ESFJ. It's going to judge people, categorize people. And it's like, you're bad, you need to be protected, you need to be followed. So an artisan wouldn't say that. They'd be like being like role models, or this person is awesome, but it's like that instinct to follow someone. Like, and he does have that. So it's like that he's like an ESFJ. He's a collaborator guardian. And then here again, calling out a Chloe. And then you can see here, ESFJ Mama Grizzly mode. Again, this is, again, you've got the temperament coming here. You've got the FE, you've got the protection. Yeah, so if you take that in, important to take that in my opinion. So you can see there, again, this was on Facebook, this publicly shaming and putting down of somebody. And you could almost argue that this is a bit of third slot SE, as in the strongest unvalued function in ESFJ. So this slot here, SE here, fish is water. So if I go back to FE, FE. So the ESFJ, it's like, this is empirically wrong, endangering children. And it's also coming naturally from the temperament as well, naturally protective. And this particular ESFJ, Mama Grizzly, is actually her mother. So, now part of this as well, I believe, is that your ESFJ, you care what the neighbors think. Right here. Young children walk past my house together, and one child already picked up one of the packets, bringing it to my attention. So what do you think happened? So in front of her house, so you're ESFJ, and these things which you see as dangerous to children are outside of your house, and a child knocks on your door and maybe says, hey, did you leave these here? So the ESFJ is also going to get really angry, because I think it's reasonable to assume is they think I did it. They think I was irresponsible. They think I was the one that was endangering children. So there you got like a lot of whammies going on for ESFJ, where it's like ESFJ really cares what the neighbors think, that part of FE, and it's like, it's not said here, but I think that's the implication, because it's something dangerous to children put outside her house, and it's going to look like, oh, that she put it out. And then the child brings it to her attention. The child's not going to know, hey, someone's put this outside of your house, because they just assume it's that person's rubbish. So it's like, that's a big part of it as well. Yeah. I mean, right there. I mean, this is literally true. I just censored this bit and added this bit in pink. This is literally true from someone I know, and I went through the Kersey temperament sort of with her, and her preferences ESFJ, and the temperament fits everything. You can see that here, and this is where you, like, again, it's, you've got the FE with the SE, and it's like this public condemnation on Facebook, actually tagged her, called her out for doing this. And the reason why I'm sharing this is that this was a post which was to the world, a public post on Facebook, right? And then here, Yoruba value. Those who are selfish will come to bear their loads alone. So again, the empirical parts of FE. The affect display, as I wrote here, group morality is empirical. You can study a society, you look at books, anthropologists, and it's like, see what the particular values are of a culture, what is done and not done in particular cultures. Yeah, that is empirical. It's there. And I've done. All right. Okay, and I did. Okay, now we're going to do SE. How is SE empirical? Well, I mean, that's an easier sell, because you've already got it as external, and socionics would say sensing as external. So I don't really have to prove that it's external. I have to prove that SI has that internal subjective side to it. So, and I've gone through this in detail, so I'm just going to show this. I'm just going to go up. But yeah, again, go read Kids' Artisan chapter. And then, yeah, an ascension, being in the zone, rewarded by dopamine. And then these two NLP ideas of uptime and in time. Or you could say, in the here and now. or as Dario says, immersing in the present context. And again, if you really want to know how STPs think, listen to the co-creators of NLP. Yeah. And then you got values here. These are the values shared by artisans. So it's not just about passive, not just sensory acuity, not just passive sensing. Freedom, testing limits, vigor, action. Being impulsive is being alive, stroke fun. Excitement, courage, audacity, adaptability, composure under pressure. I sort of put that as SE harmonizing. I mean, there's the SE assertive, which is more courageous, audacious. And then there's a kind of SE harmonizing. And it's like knowing when to attack, when to defend, all of those bits. And it's sort of like, it's empirical in the, I mean, one way of saying it in a sort of not nice very way is sort of when you look at SE DOMs and the kind of movies that they like in general, what you could say is, as a sort of a stereotype of the average SE DOM and the kind of, is that you might say is this is the kind of person that is superficial. And it's like there's a kind of a taste in clothing and objects where it's like oh, it's like you got the gold, you got the bling with the diamonds or pink cars, and then it's like it doesn't look bad. It's not bad taste, but it is sort of like an in your face sort of strong sensory stimulation. And it's like the surface. It's, you could say it's superficial, or you could say it's that kind of rich sensory input. The sort of the empirical part of it is very important to these people, and this sensory input and stimulation, and that is their focus of attention. And so they are very much aware of those fine distinctions. So someone like Jeff is very sensitive to particular, sort of like the empirical parts of sound. It's a very sensitive hearing, and things and bits that are off can sort of set him off. And then all the stuff about sensing there, about sort of mentioned that before. So in sort of showing how SE is empirical is not really a stretch, because like we can sort of, and then we've got the emotional part of it. So it's the emotional part of that. So it's, to think of the artisan, stereotypically SE DOMs, they want that sensory experience, whether it be, we can go to extremes here, sort of the hedonism, fighting, drinking, enjoyment, being in the moment. It's situational awareness. It's all the here and the now, the reality of the now, and all of that is real. And the most real, and then the next most real is like, it depends on the person. Like for the FE Dom, it's like the world of feelings is real to it, because someone looks sad, it makes that person feel sad. The FE Dom feel sad. It's like, so in terms of psychological realism, that is real. It's affecting me. These feelings are going impinging upon, and this is what INFJs frequently talk about, that the INFJ wants to be alone, but it's like other people's feelings get sort of interjected into it. Yeah. Right. A bit more here. I'm just gonna put this on screen, and then I'm not gonna read through this because it would take too long. But yeah, if you want to freeze that, I'm gonna move it up. So 3, 2, 1. Again, 4. Yes, that's an interesting one, since that's one to think about, since by it truth is tested. when it comes to perception. So yeah, I mean, I call that reception. Reception, you're just receiving sensory information. Right. Perceptions are, however, mental contents of far greater differentiation than the field of sensation which we have in mind. So, for instance, you are perceiving these words. You are recognizing these marks on the screen as words, and words as signifiers, and signifiers have a signified or an interpretant. And so, for instance, here, the German word. So we see the signifier here. So, Wahrnehmung, that's the signifier. But what does it mean? So thinking is not external. It's like, what exactly does it mean? So, and again, here, stuff on perception. So, perception is making sense out of the raw sensory experience. Right, and then there's a bit more from Dibley. Good writer, by the way. I mean, he was a newspaper man. He ran a newspaper in Manchester, so he had a good writing style, Dibley. And then emotioning. Or right, and then feelings. Yeah, I'm knackered for space, so it's just bits. Right, there you go. Right. Yeah, there was a blurred line between emotions and feelings, but this is what happens when, again, that's how the brain is arranged, because human beings were more emotional, like say the dogs, and then they become more cognitive. You've got the cerebral cortices, because there are two of those. So cortices, and cortex apparently it comes from the Greek for bark. Cerebral cortices for, and then it gets more towards sentiment rather than more animalistic emotions. Now, does a snake feel emotions? It's more just reflex with a snake, but a lot of mammals, like I said, you can see a dog experiences emotions. So how we know how SE is empirical, how is subjective. So artisans, here and now, what they're interested in is they're very concrete, very sensory in that aspect. Now, it can also be subjective as well. Like, see my SDP video for how the TI comes in and thinking for oneself. So, 10 STPs can read the same situation and then have different solutions because they're all thinking for themselves. That's how they are subjective, individualistic. SFP it's their own feelings and like what can trip it up and what they relate to it and connection in that. And so, this idea of that Jung nailed with the idea of empirical and subjective, it gets into it models how someone is connected to the world and can communicate with others. That's the empirical part. It's the bit that people share, and then the subjective is what is individual. And this conception helps to explain how we can communicate and get the general idea across, and then also how we miscommunicate and don't fully understand somebody else and see that that person is thinking in a different way and that lot. So again, the empirical and the subjective, rather than what original sociologists says, which is that sensing and thinking are completely external. Well, if that was the case, everyone would think pretty much the same, and everyone would understand the word in exactly the same way, and that makes no sense. That completely contradicts semantics and semiotics and linguistics. So that's just an asinine dichotomy. People know that meanings change and audiences read things differently. So we know that SE is empirical. So okay, now now we're going to be looking at SI. So ISFJ is more subjective than ESFJ because it's a subjective type. It's an introvert. More subjective, more towards the SI than the FE. Right. So now we're getting towards SI. Very complex function, SI. Really had to split it up because there are those three definitions of SI. The one that Jung concentrated on, the subjective sensing part of it. Kersey and MBTI, because MBTI influenced by Kersey, that sort of the conservative, risk avoidant, safety first temperament aspect of SI, and then there is that part of SI about internal bodily harmony. And again, which like in Kersey would see like the ISFJ nurse and the hospital being the natural home for guardians. Yeah, and then the structure focus. I've done videos on this, so I'm not gonna read all this through. I've done videos on each function. Yeah. Order for guardians is safety and reliability. So this is what Socionics gets wrong. Socionics looks at the behavior of what we KBN people, Kersey, Bowen's, Nardi, would call guardians. It looks at the behavior and it goes, this is organized, this is procedural, this is structural logic. And it's like, that's just the behavior. What has led to that behavior? Is the guardian wanting safety and reliability? So the temperament, okay, I want to do this the right way. I don't want to mess up. So I'm going to go towards what has worked in the past. I'm going to do it how it should be done. And then I can't be blamed. Because it's not like you tried something. No, you failed. And then you could say, right, fire him, fire her. Why did you do that? That's more taking a risk. It's like a bit like Peter Schiff gave the example of money managers, and if they do, and the Guardian would do the same as the other ones, and so if the money manager or the mutual funds or whatever don't perform that well, that Guardian or that defensive person can say, well, it's just the same as everybody else. I didn't do anything wrong. I did what should be done. Whereas if you've got someone who's thinking more for him or herself, and she says, oh, I'm going to invest in gold, but for various reasons, the price of gold, even though it's the right decision, the price of gold goes down, it doesn't pan out, she could get fired. Even though she did the right thing, she took that risk, and it's like, in the long run, she's going to be right, but she got fired. So you get a lot of people copying each other. So it's like these defensive practices. Right, so again, it's the behaviors, but it's caused by the instinct. Right. So, and again from Vanderhoop, the advantages and disadvantages of this type are well brought out in The Reserved and Conservative Farmer. This is 1937. English translation by Laura wasn't chained to a kitchen sink, Hutton, in 1939. Was she an INTP female? With his care, Guardian words, conservative, care, in the same old way, resistance to anything new. What is the underlying values behind this function? And it's studying the Kersey temperament. It's just a suggestion. Suggest heavily that you read Kersey's Guardians chapter in Please Understand Me Too and his Artisans chapter in Please Understand Me Too, and then you will know the difference and you will understand SE and SI. Because that's what Dario and Linda Bounds have done. They've effectively said SE is the essence of artisan and SI is the essence of guardian. And it's a very descriptive way of doing it. You look at the whole type of behavior of artisans, and it's like, okay, that's how we're going to define SE. We're not going to make up SE out of nowhere and just describe it as one thing. Force sensorics, which is what socionics does, classical socionics, and that just gets the SE assertive. Right, so again, and then again, the primary values, the absolute primary values in three groups: security, safety, self-preservation, physical health, belonging, and to fit in. Why is that value there? Because it is, from a natural selection point of view, it's advantageous. The person that fits in is going to be supported by the tribe and is more likely to survive. So I added that to the Daniel Katz's purposes. I call it the societal purpose that of attitude can serve, but it's not a direct benefit to the individual. It's an indirect benefit to the individual because people say that person's a good team player. And the person isn't thinking strategically about it as in, oh, if I'm a good player, they're then going to be good to me. The actual instinct is to be a good team player. And then indirectly it benefits that person because that person is seen as a good egg. Right. So again here for SII, personally enjoyable sensory imagination. So these are the core values I see. And then these are consequent to that. So for example, cautiousness is consequent of safety because cautiousness enables one to achieve safety. Again here, again, see how these come from those tried and tested. What's behind tried and tested? Safety, security. Again, here these are consequent to one. These are the fundamental values of the instinct. Very different from the artisan instinct, which is sensation and audacity and freedom. Again, and Kristen, ESF and ESTJ, and she does think for herself. Right. So there we go. If you see her quote, and again there, and then these are consequent to cohort 2. And people might think, oh, FE, oh, tough. It's you just describing the function. It's not having one neat little thing and making it up. So again, let's go to cohort 2. Belonging and to fit in. That's part of it being the guardian being cooperative. Belonging and to fit in. So if you all want to belong and you want to fit in, then it's doing my bit. It's cooperation, it's duty and honor and dependability and responsibility. And it's like, so if you use the wrong word, you might think that's not part of sensor. No, it isn't. Neither is all the stuff that people put in SE. So use the right word, instincting. The instinct of guardians is that safety, and then that cohort 2, belonging and to fit in. Pretty much the same thing there. Belonging and to fit in. Especially SFJs, but even the STJs want to fit in. Want to fit in. And so that's the motivation. So how do you fit in? Not by being a lone wolf, but by cooperation. So this is why ISTJ is more cooperative than INTJ, even though they are both FE vulnerable. Again here, cooperation, an SI value and an FE value. So even though ISTJ is FE allergic, it is still cooperative, consistent with ISTJ having higher, and again, it's proved with the EEG, having higher activity in EEG region T5, which Dario labels as attend to social feedback and feel embarrassed. So, and then even more on SI, I'm not going to read all this through, but again there, the assertive part, I spent about 2 or 3 weeks doing these early in the year because it was part of a writing process, and I thought, okay, because this is for writing, because this is the Jamcom, and it's for step 8 in creating the characters, I think, okay, I want to write these out properly. Right. So, stabilize to work to make regular a will to schedule and impose. See there, the will to schedule and impose order, not the actual order and the scheduling in itself. What lies behind it? The instinct behind the behavior that socionics would label as thought. The instinct behind it is, what are the benefits of order and schedule? Stuff won't go wrong. Stuff will be more reliable. We will avoid failure. I will not be stressed. That's what lies behind. That's what leads to the behavior. So, there we go. Stabilizer. There we go. Doing SIA to others by impressing upon them to be reliable, regular. Again, even an ISFJ, accommodator guardian, will say assertively, you don't do it like that. Again, SI imaginative. So the bit that Jung focused on, and I was talking about there, remember I said before about the SFJs and the subjective association. So SI really has got these three parts to it. The subjective sensing, the stuff about the temperament, the Kersey temperament, and then also the stuff about the harmonizing part. It's just that Socionics focused is just on that little bit. And then it puts other stuff in there because of bias. And it makes SE just one thing, like blood and guts. No, there's a sophisticated part of SE as well. The adaptation to circumstances, thinking on one's feet. And it gets and blends in with the TI. Yes, songwriting without boundaries. And this is where it draws on. Yes, do this test for me. Do it for yourselves. Ask guardians about description in novels. It's going to be different. It's like they're going towards the signifiers, they're going towards the interpretants, and it's like what it evokes for that person. I remember one saying, don't just tell me the sky's blue, describe it in rich sensory detail. So they liked all that in the Song of Ice and Fire novels, which became Game of Thrones. So there, Pat Patterson. When a lyric stimulates and provokes your senses, I think he's ISFP. ISFP with a PhD. When a lyric stimulates and provokes your senses, you draw the images from your own experiences. You feel Mike Reed's and Alan Shamlin's words with your stuff. They involve you, so the song becomes about you. So subjective. That's the power of sense-bound writing. It pulls the listener into the song using his own memories as the song's material. Let's say that again. It pulls the listener into the song using his own memories of the song's material. So you've got 10 different listeners, and going to be different because they've got different memories. So the listener's experience has a subjective side to it. Consistent with folks reacting differently to the same music, it's fair to say that each person's experience is different due to that experience being subjectively coloured by his/her emotional reaction. In sensory instincting, the emotion or reaction to the stimulus is bound up with the stimulus. This reflects the brain's division between limbic emotion and cortical feeling. Guardians especially like humour with mental imagery. Again, test it. Surely I don't have to prove that mental imagery is subjective. And then neuroscience of personality. And then the qualia. Look up qualia. SI in adjectives has qualia, which supports SI being subjective. So socionics, because of that asinine dichotomy, it doesn't see a subjective side to censor. Because you've got a rigid dichotomy that makes you look silly. Alright. SI harmonizer. Again, you can see what you can see. Yeah, it is a physical, and you notice this with the SI DOMs. Yeah, the connoisseur. And as Jeff said, guardians will tell you about their medical problems. And then the role of protecting there at the bottom and being a good nurse and what it correlates to and all of that. So I'm going to move on in a moment. So I suggest you pause it to read that. Right. And then, right. So I've done a video where I've gone over that in more detail. So let's have a look at where we are in this. Okay, there. So I've covered FE, SE, and SI. So I've covered how SFJs are empirical with FE and subjective with SI, how SFPs are empirical with SE, and now we're looking at how SFPs are subjective with FI. Right. And I've looked at those other slides. Then we've got these sort of roles. there. I'll just show the roles. I'll bring that down. We've got these roles, providers, and then it goes towards improviser and composer. But we're going towards the subjective function. So FI. So again, the subjective part of it. And again, this is not I don't have to work hard to prove that feeling can be subjective. Again, this idea of FE always requires a percept. Because if you look at what FE people go towards, they go towards the affect display and they go towards the morality. And it's like, it's the done thing, just ask anyone. So there's a way of testing it. Whereas FI can be independent of a percept. So, for example, someone can write and imagine what a character is feeling. It's not there, it's purely in the imagination. And this is why I do not like creativity being pinned on one function or imagination being pinned on one function. And so eventually I thought about it. I thought, so I call it the creative subfunction, so I call it the imaginative function. And then I thought, okay, right, all the empirical functions, SE, NE, TE, and FE, have a creative subfunction. And all of the subjective functions, TI, FI, SI, and NI, all have an imaginative subfunction. I'm not going to get into typological bigotry. So here, this idiosyncratic feeling, subjective for FI. First form of subjectivity, like FE, requires a percept, an object of perception. I'm not just saying an object because a sound is not an object. It's a stimulus. So a percept is a stimulus or a series of stimuli which you recognize and you have a reaction, a feeling, a sentiment reaction to that percept. First form of subjectivity, like FE, requires a percept to react to. Here, FI is about the person's subjective, i.e. idiosyncratic, feeling response to a percept, i.e. a phenomenon. So, for example, that could be a song. That could be, yes, you get a little bit of a bleed over with the SI, and it's like when we're going towards feeling, when we're going towards emotion. It's not a neat dividing line. The brain has not got neat dividing lines between separate processes. It evolved, natural selection. Second form of subjectivity. Unlike FE, FI can be percept independent. Here, FI does not even require a percept in the present sensory experience or in a memory of past sensory experience. It can imagine it. You can imagine a character. What would this character feel in this situation? So FI imaginative, see FI imaginative section. All imaginative subfunctions can be percept independent. Thought experiments. And these are used a heck of a lot in creative writing. Especially if you're writing a novel, imagining what a character's feeling. FI imaginative. Yeah. Right, so what we're going to go, empathy. Right, how I define empathy. Because you see, the thing is, Socionics, thinking is not external. So when I say empathy, it's probably going to have a different definition from the way you use it, because we are not telepathic. When I just say the word empathy, the meaning is not automatically communicated. Look it up in a dictionary, compare it in various dictionaries, compare the word inflation in various dictionaries, where most of these dictionaries, due to political bias, will get the definition of inflation wrong. Bit of a exclamation point, putting that cough sweet in. Right, so see the FE graphic for how this differs from FE introjection of another person's feeling state via that person's affect display, especially facial expression and tone of voice. So this is more personal, and again from Story by Robert McKee, a fantastic book for all story writers. So, empathetic means like me. Deep within the protagonist, the audience recognizes a certain shared humanity. We empathize for very personal, if not egocentric reasons. So, personal, subjective. When we identify with a protagonist and his desires in life, we are in fact. So, all throughout the book, he refers to the protagonist as he. When the book came out in '97, when we identify with the protagonist and his desires in life, we are in fact rooting for our own desires in life. Through empathy, the vicarious linking of ourselves to a fictional human being, we test and stretch our humanity. Keyword vicarious. Relatability. If someone is a male INTJ Enneagram 6 watching George Costanza, an INTJ E6 character based on Larry David, his writer, he would likely relate to that character better than if the watcher were a male ESTP 8, who would have contempt for George. Despite being FI allergic, a female ESTP watchers, so female ESTPs would relate more to ESTP hotshot pilot Kara Starbuck Thrace in Battlestar Galactica, played flawlessly, and I literally mean that, flawlessly, by Katie Sackhoff. Exceptional actress. So, other kinds of empathy, like, it's like not really, it's like an approximation of empathy. A theory of mine, sort of, it's like how you define empathy, because thinking is not external. Part of thinking is external, otherwise you wouldn't be able to understand me at all, but there are subjective parts. So again, I did this. This is the only function that I did high side and low side for. And so when I get to the low side of FI, it looks really bad. So this is a little bit exaggerated, especially when I get to the low side. But I think these are very powerful pros of that, or the high side of FI. Healthy FI is correlated with the high intrapersonal IQ. Correlated with, not exactly the same, which is also somewhat correlated with maturity. I mean, how many ESTPs and ENTPs do you know that have a real proper understanding of themselves? How many ESTPs and ENTPs have you said to genuinely, you're really mature? FI allergic is a serious deficit. So my point here is that because FI allergic is a serious deficit, it proves that FI is important. They are bad at core FI and all its subfunctions. But the problem is, there's like a golden mean with FI, like the Goldilocks principle. If you've got too much FI, that's a problem. If you've got too little FI, that is also a big problem, if not worse. Gut feeling, conscience, and sensitivity are related to FI. These are not words that you associate with ESTPs and ENTPs. Neither is empathy, but they can be. ESTPs can be very good readers of affect display. Empathy related to identification or bond with the other person. Good for arts, especially acting and character writing. Determines appropriateness because determines the status of each relationship. And again here, key point. FE can also determine appropriateness, but via attention to social norms rather than from an internal subjective thing. So for example, in Seinfeld, Comedy of Manners, they'll talk about what is and is not the done thing. FE. It's a part of FE. Part of that FE being an attention towards what is and is not done, whereas INTJ would not care. So, low side of FI. This is where I'm keeping it real. Keeping it real. Judgmental, self-righteous, and oversensitive. Over-personalizes and subjective emo. Prone to projection. Counters empathetic ability. Yes, Jung wrote about that, where if you've got an FI person who becomes egocentric, can't empathize. Self-centered because it's all about how people, percepts, or things can make the FI wheelhouse types person feel. So, for example, if someone's really Enneagram 4 fixated, they can be cut off from that intrapersonal intelligence. Because if you've got someone who's convinced that he or she is outstanding, sort of exceptional, and say they're middle-aged and they're not produced any great works, and it's like, okay, so you got a number of options, dear. You either, actually produce a great work to match your ego, bring your ego down to where you are. Why? Because the focus on being, when it's like Enneagram 4 is about being special, but what they mean by special is not just odd, it means exceptional. Okay, so that means ultimately that the Enneagram 4 in its extreme is egotistical. Egotism is not good, because then you've got this bloated self-image that's going to stop you from getting in touch with what's really going on inside you. So you've got ego defenses, that's going to prevent self-knowledge, and so that the intrapersonal IQ will go down because of the ego. Now the opposite of that is too much self-knowledge and being riddled with self-doubt and anxiety. Closed-minded after judgment made. Suppresses cold, and this is a little bit contentious, suppresses cold, but it's a trend. Suppresses cold reasoning, e.g. hard for many FI wheelhouse types to understand Peter Schiff, especially when he talks about the negative consequences of the minimum wage. Right. I mean, you might go through an argument with you and say, okay, let's TI this. What would happen if you set the minimum wage at $50 an hour? What would happen? Say you're running a business, and it's like, okay, is this person giving me at least $51 of value? No, well, I can't employ this person. Right, so these, but like I said, that kind of argument, these TI arguments, all about, Peter Schiff would talk about, he brought it up with Thomas Sowell, this great economist. I think he's still alive, Thomas Sowell. And he was the only person that Peter Schiff respectfully called him sir. That respect. I think he's a doctor. Anyway, so he brought up with Thomas Sowell about discrimination laws backfire, and it's like, Peter, do you really want to go there? And when he asked Thomas Sowell about that, it's like Thomas Sowell's like Thomas Sowell's black, and it's like, I'm not going to go there. So the point there being that Peter Schiff would talk about, if you've got an employer and it's like, well, if I hire this white person, if I hire this white man, he can't sue me if I fire him. And if I don't hire this black man, then I can't get sued for not hiring. But if I hire this black man because I think he's the better person for the job, and then I fire him later, I could get sued. Even though, but hang on a minute, if I'm the same person that hired him, was I racist when I hired him? But the point is that from the business point of view, it's like, well, I'm not going to then hire the person who could sue me. So the actual legislation has led to discrimination because of it, because of the liability. So when Peter Schiff then goes through that kind of reasoning, the FPs don't like that, because they're looking at the feeling, intent, and the goodwill behind the policies rather than the actual cold, hard repercussions of it. Right. So FIA being assertive, yeah. Just like there with the one with the ESFJ Milner Grizzly, where that's asserting empirical values about the children. This is more individualistic. ethics rather than morality. Again, the way I define morality, the way I defined ethics, you look it up, you're going to get a different definition. Always INTPs are redefining words. Look at Carl Jung, is that he has definitions for words. So for me, morality is more societal, and it's like the mores of society, whereas ethics is more personal. But other people can switch it around. So this is where they say that guardians are preoccupied with morality. Like, what is the done thing? What does society say? What are these external values? And ethics is more personal. That's how I use the two words. But being prepared to stay true to self, even if it means going against the social grain. That's when you're using FI assertively. You're asserting that what I feel is right. So, for instance, someone could have that about Peter Schiff's arguments and can say, Peter, your position is wrong. That it is this is a step on a road to a certain outcome, and I'm not going to listen to your TI propaganda about this in your clever arguments. You are trying to justify discrimination and stuff like that, and it's like really sort of asserting, and sort of like going that people need to have a decent ways to live and all of this sort of stuff. And then Peter Schiff would come back with a TI argument of, well, the cost of living is so high because of the monetary policy of the United States and devaluing the dollar, and because of all the embedded taxes that all get passed on. Because whenever you buy a product, where do you think the taxes come from? They come from the customers. When you get a bill, all those taxes are embedded. So if you hire a plumber, well, you're paying the plumber's taxes. Those taxes are passed on to you. So we can go through all of that. But what a TI person might say, or a TE person, is that, yeah, but you got to go through all those Peter Schiff arguments for like about a day to go through all of the logic of it. But the feeling part, you can do that quicker. So it's the values are different. The key is to bring those into harmony. And Peter Schiff does that sometimes with his sort of E1 fix about the libertarian and the values of freedom and all of that. Right then. So just bringing up examples. He said it, I didn't say it. Cancel him, not me. Then art for FI. FI harmonizing. Yeah. Connection. Right, so the hard limit on this new software is 2 hours. Yeah. Yeah, harmony. There can be a harmony with FI as well. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's yeah. If you see Leon Sal's channel, Type Tips, when we interviewed him, Jonathan and I, actually, he blew my mind. Because I thought it was impossible for an FI Dom to be Enneagram 9. Because I thought, well, the Enneagram 9 is all about other people, and it's not about the self, and it's sort of blind to its own feelings. And FI is about like personal feelings. So I thought, does not compute, does not match, contradict. But if you're in FI harmonizing, and he's like balancing the values of other people with himself and all of that, and it's like, that's how an INFP can be Enneagram 9 fixated. So if you see that, I'm not explaining it very well, but it's like, it's an eye opener for me. Because on its face, it's like FI, personal values, and Enneagram 9, you're sort of like taking on the values of other people and invisible to your own needs. It's like, how can those two things go together? Yeah. So, that is it. That is how are SFJs empirical? How are SFJs subjective? So they're empirical with FE. FE the subjective with SI. SFP empirical with SC and subjective with FI. And so you can see there where how you empirical, how you subjective. Right then, so that is the end of it, and this is the first video with this software. In future, I hope to do, that would be cool to do a commentary with the cast. Oh, because you can have 12 spots at the JamCon episode, but I'll probably put that on the once I set it up on the locals page. Yeah, but I'd record it in this. Anyhow, it's all hairy-fairy plans at the moment until it becomes real. It's just talk. Yes, I've just had a notification. Your live stroke recording will end automatically in 30 minutes due to plan limits. Well, thank you for letting me know. I'll end it now.